And with that, we move to our next session entitled Decision Making in the Face of Uncertainty. It's a session dedicated to how climate risk is connected to two things: the evolution of our decision-making processes and how it raises both investment and insurability questions for the financial sector. In other words, how decision makers might act in the face of deep uncertainty that are sometimes beyond the standard risk assessment methods and tools. We will delve into the latest research on potential impacts of climate change on the insurance industry, including both physical and transitional risks, and touch on the need for organizational and cultural shifts to account for risks that the industry, nor anybody else for that matter, has seen before. I'm very pleased to welcome our panel. Joining us virtually today is Juliette Kayyem, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, and hopefully we'll see her on one of the screens soon. And here in the room, we have Dr. Robert Lempert from the Rand Party Center for the Longer Range Future, Samantha Hill, who's a Managing Director of Sustainable Investing at CPP Investments, and Mark Hughes, who's going to be moderating our session for us, and Mark is our GRI Chair, with questions presented to Mark by the panelists, from Mark the panelists, and also he will be looking at Slido to field your questions. Une fois que ces questions sont traitées, nous ouvrirons aux questions de l'auditoire. Alors, veuillez vous soumettre vos questions sur l'application Slido et nous essayerons de répondre autant que possible. So, Mark, over to you to just, I don't think you have, we just start with Dr. Lempert, sorry.
No, I can start.
You have a quick start.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
And Juliette, we can see Juliette up on the screen.
We can see Juliette on the screen.
Welcome,
Great.
Juliette.
So, welcome everyone. As you heard from Vanda, the title we have here is Decision Making in the Face of Uncertainty. The word uncertainty seems to be pretty much a key word that we've heard all through the morning so far. And also from Neil Ferguson this morning, the concept of unintended consequences. So I think we're going to perhaps explore a little bit of both uncertainty and the potential for unintended consequences as we actually try to deal with some of the decisions we have around climate, insurability, et cetera. We're going to start with the three speakers. I'm going to have them go each in order. They're going to speak about 10 minutes each, and that'll leave around 20 minutes, 25 minutes for questions. I do have the Slido, as Vanda said. I also have some prepared questions, so please jump in as you go. We're going to start with you, Robert, please.
Great. Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I had the honor to serve as one of the coordinating lead authors for the recent IPCC report. So my comments are going to draw from that and then layering on my own work. But, the IPCC identified finance as one of the 5 key enablers of climate action. So discussing climate at this conference is definitely very much on point. I want to start by stepping back and asking a question that motivates much of my research, which is, how do we use science, economics, other quantitative evidence to navigate through these turbulent times, which are characterized what we often call deep uncertainty? I'll say more about exactly what that is in a second. But that we live in a time of deep uncertainty is not a hard sell these days. You know, pandemic, populism, war in Europe, and then climate change, where we've got this race between extreme events which are unfolding at best at the sort of the tail end of our projections, and then this amazing technological revolution where in fact renewables in many cases are less expensive than the fossil alternatives. And so it's like which race is going to go fastest. One of the messages of the IPCC report is that transformation, large-scale changes are inevitable. And so we'll either get transformations where we make significant changes to our socioeconomic systems to both be more resilient to climate impacts and to get to a zero-carbon economy, or the climate system and other systems will transform us in any event. So our choice is really not status quo versus transformation, but do we get transformations that we like or not like? We've talked today about unquantifiable risk or unquantifiable uncertainty versus risk, and I'm going to give a little little bit more nuance to that because I think that undercuts, it's not quite right. There's a lot that we can quantify in this world of deep uncertainty, but in a very, very different way than perhaps we're used to. You know, the way that we're used to having experts, scientists, help us make decisions is we ask them to predict the future. And prediction has many virtues. It's at the core of the scientific method, and it makes sense when we're seeking small changes in the systems that behave in ways it expect. But today, prediction-based analysis is not always the right approach, often not the right approach, because, frankly, the experts don't really know what's coming. So the one answer, at least, is the set of concepts and tools, which we've called decision-making under deep uncertainty. And there's a fancy definition for deep uncertainty, which connects it to Bayesian statistics. But the more colloquial way to think about it is situations where the one thing that we're confident about is we're going to get surprised, and that when policies are contested, it's not hard for the different contestants to come up with competing forecasts that are different to falsify with the evidence we've got. So deep uncertainty may sound scary, but by embracing it, decision makers can actually come up with more resilient policies and help generate consensus among implementing them. So to understand what this decision-making under deep uncertainty is, it's useful to step back and compare it to traditional prediction-based approaches, which there's obviously a wide range of these approaches. They're very powerful, but they generally start with a consensus view of the future, which is often forecast, which is not the right way to do it, but a consensus best estimate joint probability distribution over enumerated future states of the world. And that's sort of the basis of many of our analytic techniques. And once you have that, then you can rank your different options and then maybe do a little bit of sensitivity analysis to see how sensitive you are to the assumptions. And much of what at least science-based analysis is in this form, which one might call predict then act. And so this works well when there's a single decision maker or planner, when there's a common vision, agreement on what constitutes the good, and when the world is fundamentally predictable so that you can make a plan and expect it's going to unfold as you expect. And so if such a world ever existed, and it certainly does in some domains, it's not really the one we live in now. There's, for most of the problems of interest, there's no single decision maker. Rather, there's multiple independent yet interdependent actors whose actions come together to shape our path forward. People have different goals, and often people distrust and maybe don't even like people who have different goals. And the world behaves as a complex system which can be understood but not predicted. So we can, as it unfolds, we can understand what's going on, but it's often very difficult to predict where it's going to go. And so the way decision-making under deep uncertainty addresses this, you can think of as doing the analysis backwards. You start with the goals. What are we trying to get? What are the set of things that the different stakeholders would like? And what are our plans to get there, which is either what we're currently doing or what we might be proposing to do. And then we use our analytics to stress test to say, what are the future conditions that are best correlated with this action getting to our goals and best distinguished from the sets of futures where our actions don't meet our goals. And then you can use that information to help identify more robust and resilient plans. And the idea is that at each stage, those are high confidence or higher confidence statements than we might get in a world of prediction. So in many ways, these are classic ideas. General and President Eisenhower said plans are useless, but planning is everything. But what's new is that we have technology that can help us think through these ideas a lot better. So predict and act methods use the computer as a calculator. The people go off, they formulate a question, give it to the computer, and it gives us an answer. Do this has got higher benefit cost ratio than something else. DMDU is designed to help humans and computers collaborate really in problem framing, exploring what's important, what's not, deliberating on options, and choosing how to best shape our future. And the approach has several virtues. The emphasis on using our analytics for stress testing reduces, or at least shines a light on, expert overconfidence, which can contribute to distrust of experts. An emphasis on robustness and resilience produces plans which are less brittle to surprise, like when we get it wrong. The multi-scenario, multi-objective approach is more democratic or more enabling of democracy because it respects different views and is transparent about the trade-off in which views are being served and which not in any particular analytic statement. And it really focuses on risk management as the key piece instead of assessment, because it diverts analytic attention to coming up with solutions that we be confident work well even when the world surprises us. So those are all very grand statements. Let me give you some specific examples. So the one case I really like is the recent IPCC report provides, as IPCC reports have done for years, sea level rise projections. And it does it in a particular way. It gives probability distributions for the well understood components of sea level rise. And then it has a whole set of high-end sea level rise possibilities, which it phrases as storylines. So it gives you the best scientific understanding of the chains of events which could lead to, say, 2 meters of sea level rise by century end, which are well outside the probability distributions. And so what's that meant to do is to give probability distributions for the risk, sort of the traditional risk planning, but allow you to understand the conditions that you ought to monitor that might, and when those conditions might occur, that would cause your plan to be failing, and encourage you to develop contingency plans, signposts, actions, near-term actions that can deal with that. The subsequent chapters of the report lay out a variety of what's called adaptation decision pathways that make use of this mixed information, quantitative in both sense, but very different or enhanced from normal risk management. The Thames River Barrier in London, England, is designed with this sort of thinking in mind, where it's got an infrastructure plan and then particular levels of sea level rise at which, if you saw those coming, you would institute particular contingency plans that are built into the current infrastructure. A much smaller scale example is the city of Santa Cruz, which has put together, which is a seaside town in California, has put together an adaptive pathways based on this idea of, expected sea level rise and high level cases. They were surprised and not. They got what they thought was their earliest 30-year case, I think a year after they did their plan. But the fact that they had gone through this extreme, what they would do with this extreme case, even though they thought it was coming in 30 years, enabled them to respond to it. Just a couple of quick words on insurance, and I'll yield the stage. But governance is another of the 5 IPCC key enablers. And so from this deep uncertainty situation view, looking at insurance, we would really look at what combination of prices, market forces, combined with new governance mechanisms would be more robust over a wide range of uncertainties. So, rising premiums are certainly going to get people's attention, but aren't going to solve the problem all on their own. And just then to offer one interesting way of thinking about, sort of new governance arrangements. This was legislation that passed the California legislature twice, got vetoed by the governor for reasons we could discuss. But in dealing with essentially rich people's houses along the coast of California, people who were planning to spend lots of money to armor the coast in front of their houses in ways that would mess up the coast, the natural evolution of the coast under sea level rise. The idea was for the state to buy the properties and then rent them back at essentially a value that would go to the expected level, how long the place would last. And so essentially the state was taking the tail risk, but the condition of this was that you couldn't armor the coast and you could just protect your belongings, but not the property. And so it was a way of partitioning the risk and a new governance mechanism that seems to be very much in the spirit of how do we combine market forces and new governance arrangements to deal with these hard to predict risks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure from a credit risk perspective, I would actually want to lend to the state of California based upon that sort of tail risk that they're now actually getting, but that's a different question.
Yeah.
Just a reminder that if you do have any questions, please put them into Slidos and I'll try to keep track of them. We're going to move to Juliet now. Juliet is talking about insurability challenges of climate change. Juliet, please join us. Oh,
It's sound, yeah.
hang on a minute. Can we get the sound up a little bit, please? Hang on. So, technical challenge. So why don't we jump to Samantha and we'll come back to you, Juliet, when we try to figure out the...
Okay.
Oh, hang on. There,
Okay.
try it now. Juliet, please speak.
Are you good for me now?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, good. I'm hearing you a little hollow, but I'm going to keep talking unless interrupted in my chat. But I'm sorry not to make it there because you require me to teach here. But I want to talk about important from the perspective of disaster prevention, which is the field that I'm in and have been in, crisis management, thinking about not just preparation, but response. So I come with, and someone say a new thing, I've been in this field a long time, but my obsession with insurance started about 6 months ago and led to a piece on a contributing writer for the Atlantic that covered Tucson. We should start listening to insurance companies. It seems to me, and talking about California, that one can blame the insurance companies, one can hate premium rate increases, and from the consumer perspective. But they're just the canary. They're not the full one, right? That we lose our ability to focus on the structure we put in place that make an important risk calculation a way to protect lives. That's how I think about it. Then we are failing our various. So I thought that I would put this into two buckets. One way to think about how insurance can help us fail in light of climate change or any disaster, but climate change in particular. If you'll notice, I use the word fail-safer. It's a terminology that I write about, that I coined for my book, because it's a silly way to think about failing safe in a world like ours. There's going to be risk. Those risks will come to fruition, and our measure of success will simply be, did these institutions, homeowners, insurance companies fail safer? So one way that we can promote, which is essentially just preparedness, one way that we think about promoting, incentivizing that rather than wishing, right, everyone was ready, to obviously using insurance as a way to demand a certain kind of behavior. So you see that all the time now in homeowners insurance, can't get X unless you do Y. We see that in cyber insurance in terms of risk, can't get X unless you do Y. And thinking about ways in which insurance can drive preparedness, not response, but can drive preparedness in the climate change space, so that our measure of success is essentially where things let back than they might have otherwise been. So I'm not talking about prevention, I'm talking about the gap between bad and really, really bad, right? And and then we can minimize costs to community, and then think about recovery and resiliency. So in terms of disaster management, before I even get to the insurance, to the challenges we're having in insurance now with climate change, all sorts of opportunities, absolutely exciting opportunities to get communities to be better prepared. A new concept, it hasn't gotten scaled, many of you have heard of, called parametric insurance, just basic grouping risks so that communities together prepare better, so that if there is a disaster at some level of harm, that community can get reimbursed without worrying about particular claim of an individual. The community itself gets reimbursed. And so that leads to my second area, where insurance is bumping up against disaster management, crisis management framework. What we want to do, what's happening now in insurance with climate change, is we're going the individual risk assessment. Did this homeowner do X, Y, and Z? Obviously, we now can't insure particular areas, but we won't, or we'll get out. Now, I'll take it as a truism that insurance companies don't want to leave major markets like California, because if you do it right, that ends up being it's a very lucrative market. And so what they were bumping up against was two disaster-related frameworks that have been stagnant for decades. So I'm going to go into those, and just you can think about how is our stagnant disaster management framework, which always view climate change or disasters as random and rare, right? How we rethink that as disasters as standard operating procedure, right? And the challenge is that our disaster management framework, the world I'm in, has not adapted to this idea that this is now our standard operating procedure. So two areas that I think insurance companies are getting smart about pushing and sort of at least beginning to demand. The California and other areas, which is important laws that were put into place to protect consumers from bad behavior by insurance companies, have not adapted to the tyranny the internet's bad, so I'm making sure nothing is on. Have not adapted to the changes in recurring disaster. So what we're doing now is seeing California and other companies change the way that California and other states change the way that they're dealing with insurance companies to allow these insurance companies to be more flexible. California just did this change in the last few days. The second, and I'm hearing my internet and Twitter on your end, is more importantly is on Thursday, the White House will be announcing a new disaster management climate resiliency effort. This is now going to be the first time that we try to update our disaster management frameworks to align with the risks the insurance industry are seeing. So in two important areas, state and local laws, as well as now federal law, we're beginning to, I think, catch up to what the insurance industry has been warning us by changing its market over time. So I'm going to close here and try to see what's going on with the sound, but I'll be here for question and answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for the sound. I hope we got most of that, and that we can build from what Juliet has said into some questions. We're going to turn now to Samantha, and I guess you'll try to give us a bit of a practitioner's sense of what you've heard so far and how it affects your institution.
Yes, well, thank you. I'll humbly contribute that to the esteemed views of this panel, which I'm so happy to be a part of today. And so I thought we could start just walking you, through history a little bit, at least, in terms of what the impetus is for an institutional investor in terms of getting its arms around the risks and the opportunity side that we see around climate change. and our view is that it is one of the most challenging investment topics that we face today. That translates to a full spectrum of risks that we need to understand. It also translates to a full spectrum of opportunities. We view that the world expects this of us as an investor, and that is what we must come to the table doing, which is to understand, to the extent possible, how these risks and opportunities play through in respect of the investment performance of both individual investments that we're making, but also total portfolio implications. And so that's the way that we've always viewed this topic. I've been with CPP Investments now for just over 16 years, and this is the approach that we take. How does this translate to risk and opportunity? How does it translate to returns on impacts on returns at the end of the day? And we must do this, especially in the face of uncertainty and in the face of imperfect information. So moving to, well, how do we actually get our arms around this, and how have we laid the foundation to be able to take these, to take this topic into our investment discussions, into our diligence, into our asset management? And so there were precursors to the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures that the Financial Stability Board set up. So we, like the Carbon Disclosure Project, now referred to as the CDP, which started to bring together that information and reporting, the data that we could leverage to be able to understand what the risk profile and opportunity profile was translating to. The TCFD, which we sat on as one of two asset owners, and the formation of that really took it to the next level in terms of laying out the structures to, again, put some better arms around this and start to grasp how do you again, quantify it to the extent possible, the range of outcomes that might be. And so those structures around, I love you've already brought this up, Rob, governance, but more from a corporate perspective, what are the accountabilities at that board level? What is the oversight that's appropriate there to then help direct a strategy, another bucket that management owns and the board oversees, assisted by the appropriate risk management systems in place to both monitor and capture the information necessary to do these things, and then metrics and targets available or being put in place, being decided on, that actually reflect an actioning in the plan and then performance around that. And so that now has moved into a space of being absorbed by the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is also a furtherance of how this now has become a mainstay within the financial world, and that the capabilities and the capacity has been built to the extent that we can actually move that conversation forward. And we don't have a lot of time, frankly, to move that conversation forward. The ISSB standards have moved with great speed relative to how some other international accounting standards have developed, and that is absolutely what is needed. The foundations that these frameworks and then standards have provided for us in investing is to help with developing those capabilities internally, but also in our conversations with the marketplace, in order to then translate, well, what is it that we need to do internally to really be assessing this? And the way that we decided to approach it is to take a scenario-based approach in understanding transition risks on one side, physical risks on the other, but also the interactions between those. And so I and many different individuals from across our organization came together to develop those, leveraging the multitude of science and data and research that can be then translated into stress testing, sensitizing components of our models, our investment analysis, to really say, well, what is the fan of outcomes that's possible over the horizon that we're investing in. Moving forward from that, as you were mentioning, Rob, the world has indicated it's moving to net zero. We've seen the commitments made by government, by corporates, and so our view is that is where the path is going, and that is the path that we're on. Although many, many things need to line up in order for that to happen. But what we've started to focus on, and again, here's just some practical examples of what it means to work alongside in partnership with our portfolio companies for translating, in particular, the transition risks, but also taking the physical risks of climate change into consideration. And so we've developed something called an abatement capacity assessment framework that helps us to understand what the pathway of feasible decarbonization looks like in the near term and over time. And the impetus for that was that while all these standards and frameworks have emerged to say this is what the spectrum of risk and opportunity could end up being from a quantifiable perspective, we also need to understand the economics of implementing those things and making decisions around actual minimization of the transition risk in particular when we're talking about decarbonization. And so really this abatement capacity framework looks at the economically viable tools available today. Think about energy efficiency, think about the technology stack. What does the state of the grid look like in respect of composition of renewables today? Are there purchase power agreements that are renewables based that also can be contemplated? What does that look like? And again, that's economically viable today and could be implemented. And then also take a look in future under different scenarios, say a price of $100 per ton of carbon, $150 per ton of carbon. What is the marginal abatement cost curve around that in respect of the technology options that could be available? And what would need to be happening in order for those things to be economic, and how would it affect the business decisions that are made around that? And that's what this work really is intended to bring it back to, moving from statements, wonderful statements of intent and commitment toward plausible actioning, and how does that look, including how does it flow through down to OpEx related impacts and into capital budgeting decisions and a future state. So that's where we're at in terms of that work. But we have seen very tangible low-hanging fruit opportunities with our portfolio companies. One of our retail centers, the Trafford Centre in the UK, by 2030, 56% of scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions could be abated under economic conditions that are economically viable today. So that's what we're talking about. Changing light bulbs, more energy efficient elevators. I mean, these are some of the things that still really just are on the table and need to be put into practice. I'll stop there, and
Very good.
And we can get into it further in the questions.
Excellent. May I remind everyone, I'm still looking for questions from the audience. It's a lot better when we get a little interactive with the audience. I do actually have a question, which maybe I could start with Juliette on. I've been around financial institutions for a long time. Some say that's a bad thing, but one of the ways that insurance companies sort of historically have protected themselves from climate, natural disasters, et cetera, has been catastrophe bonds. Is that still the solution, or is that going to change, or how does the insurance companies think about that these days?
I think that's exactly right.
Sorry, I didn't. Did you hear what you said?
I think she
Said
said
I
it's
think
right.
that's exactly
That's right. Okay.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
still going to do it. Okay.
Yeah. But I missed the follow-up.
All right. So I'll just keep going then. Another way that insurance
I
companies.
can't see you. I thought you said Juliette. I didn't know if you wanted me to answer that.
I did. Yes,
Yes.
please. So.
Oh, good. Okay, I can't see you, so you'll have to give me a cue. But I think that's exactly right. I think catastrophic bonds will still be essential, and let me tell you why, or a couple reasons why. Two reasons is there's no good alternative right now. Like, in other words, the market is testing out other new policy choices like parametric insurance, although I said that hasn't scaled, but I get kind of excited about that because it lets communities sort of choose their risk and go into a pool. But there's just simply no better alternative right now, but will be. I really do think that what we're seeing in California with it adapting to a real message by the insurance companies that we're not going to stay in this market, part of this market, I think shows that we're going to see changes in terms of the public response. The other reason why it's here for some period of time is in the United States and in much of the world, we have insured a last resort. And that's the public insurance system. That's the FAIR Act. That's all the different acts that our states have. Doesn't matter the politics of the state. Blue states, every state has insurance of last resort because it's sort of like a national flood insurance program on a local level. So insurance of last resort is and insurance of first resort. At last look, Florida, 80% of homeowners in Florida are using Florida's public insurance last resort as only insurance and first resort insurance. So there's going to be a lot of pressures on the public system as well to adapt and get those people out of public systems into whether it's private insurance or some combination of this. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Samantha from the audience, actually. This might be a little controversial for you. It depends on how you want to think about it. It's on sustainable investing. On one hand, it seems like this is about making the investment portfolio more resilient to climate change, the transition, versus making the portfolio greener, i.e. divesting from certain sectors. Is it one or the other, or both, or how would you think of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think, we have thought a lot about it, and what's our role in terms of moving the world to a world that's transitioning and helping to foster that energy transition. And so we have focused on financing emissions reductions, and we believe that's the most critical role that we can play in advancing that transition. And that requires a couple of different ways of looking at it, but it really is, kind of the risk lens and then the opportunity lens too. And so the work that I was talking about in respect of decarbonization and understanding, again, what's economic today, but also where we can move over time, that really is about reducing the risk profile and also contributing to those collective broader emissions being reduced that are in the real economy. And we think a whole economy transition is what's happening. Then on the opportunity side, there are huge possibilities around that, including what we've already put dollars to work against in respect of power and renewables strategies, but also more emerging technologies through different investment sleeves that we hold. And so really, I think it's for us about pursuing all of the tools available in respect of what that means to finance the energy transition.
Okay, thank you. Robert, question for you. You talk about the conflict between adaptation and mitigation. You suggest this could be resolved by multi-objective optimization. You gave us a few examples, Thames Barrier and the other municipality where they've been using it. Have you got any examples of any financial institutions that are actually trying to use this as how they think about transition or physical risk of the portfolios that they would have?
Yeah, I mean, I've done less work in the finance area directly on that. So let me transition a little bit and just say, I mostly work in the public sector, but one of the real challenges is breaking across the silos that we have, certainly on the public side, to basically enable solutions that are both mitigation and adaptation. I mean, in California, we spend a lot of energy cleaning and shipping around water. One obvious but hard to implement, but seems to be going, is just using the aqueducts and putting solar on top of them and the land around them, which both reduces evaporation and generates electricity. Pump storage and using in the as a way to provide storage that allows you to use the gigantic renewable pulse you get. So there are all these opportunities to do both at the same time. They just oftentimes just reside in different silos, and bringing them together and providing ways to actually make the trade-offs among them can really produce some powerful solutions.
Good, good. I think I've just really given you a whole new clientele to talk to. All these,
Yes.
because I do truly believe that the multi-objective optimization
Yes.
concept is how financial institutions should be thinking about this.
Yes.
So
Happy to talk about that, yeah.
He'll leave you his email and phone number
Yes, yes, yeah,
after we
exactly,
finish,
yeah.
so we can
Yeah.
expand that.
Lempert@rand.org, yeah.
This is a question for all of you, and I'll maybe start with Robert again, and then we'll go to Samantha, and then Juliet last. Can you speak to the difficult environment that we seem to have between Europe and the United States at the moment, and how they sort of have different focuses on ESG, the importance of climate actions, et cetera, and how do we deal with that in today's world?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, let me answer a slightly different question, which is the balance between free trade and then trying to build up your own domestic manufacturing. I mean, people have asked, as you're pointing to here, sort of particularly in the U.S., the resistance to sustainability, ESG, and so forth. I once had the good fortune a number of years ago to work on a National Academy of Sciences panel with a former governor of Wyoming, which I think is the state in the U.S. that went most for Trump in the last election, or last two elections. He said, the people in my state aren't stupid. They're not going to accept climate change until they see a economic future for Wyoming and a zero carbon world. So providing benefits, local benefits from the energy transition for locales is an important piece of this. We've been doing a lot of work in the California Central Valley, which is both the sort of the renewable energy and the oil capital of California. They both have a fear of, in the energy transition, losing their biggest source of tax revenue. And they also regard solar as something of an extractive industry. You fallow agricultural land because you don't have the water. You put PV cells, you get the labor for putting them in, and then, in their words, they ship the electricity over the mountains to Santa Monica, where I live, and where the California creative economy uses all that electricity for their benefit. And so, decarbonization is not just paving over agricultural lands with photovoltaics. It's moving industry, so green industry that can use, say, all that the pulse of green energy, locally, and maybe carbon sequestration using what were oil fields to store carbon. So that then conflicts, say, with totally open trade, and the Europeans desire to build their cars there and sell them to the U.S. and vice versa. And I think that's in some sense, the real heart of the tension, because if we can provide the local benefits, people they won't call it climate change, but they'll take the IRA money and spend it.
Very good. Samantha, perspective, Europe, USA, and you can throw Canada in if you like. But
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe I'll bring in the perspective that I experienced last week in New York during Climate Week, and I would say that there's a tension certainly, and a bit of frustration just around the place that we've arrived at, including because there are different perspectives on how to move forward, whether that's innovation or regulation or what have you, or some combination of all of the above. But I think there's also, more often than not, agreement that there certainly are financial implications to not understanding this well. I think we're there. And then certainly to not moving forward and figuring out how to make all these mechanisms work together to actually progress. And I don't think that we've figured out all the ways to bring those mechanisms together in the most productive way possible in an ecosystem. Was a lot of what was talked about last week, but I think there is alignment in the motivation to do so. And so I'm optimistic that it's a challenging time and it feels really hard to move things forward, but to me that's a good sign that we're moving in the right direction and that hopefully we will get over this next hump.
okay. Juliet, if you can hear me, any thoughts
Yeah.
on the USA versus Europe dichotomy at the moment?
Yeah, so a couple of just observations to add on to that. I mean, the first is sort of outside what your politics are, the political atmosphere in right now in terms of adopting a green agenda is much more successful locally than it is national. It is very hard to find of any party in the United States a mayor who's not dealing with the world I live in, which is, of course, the disaster side. So I want us to stop climate change and stop all the bad things happening, but once we're here, which we are here. So that actually aligns in a really interesting way with cities and city leaders throughout Europe. So you're seeing, whatever you're not seeing above the tensions, you're seeing a much more operational sharing of information, best practices, expertise, which is also, again, very exciting in a world that can seem slightly overwhelming. I think two areas I would just quickly focus on as well. I think this narrative about the economic impact is beginning to be heard and stated in a way of reframing climate in the United States so that it can align with not just European but international interests. So what you're seeing in the United States is farmers are being, let's say a red state, are being impacted by climate change. They're looking out to see, their cows drowning, right? They're experiencing it. Don't call it that, right? But put money into the Farm Bill, which is what the White House did, to support our trade and our capability to keep our agricultural and industrial economic engine going, so that we can be active players in economics. I think that it's not a sleight of hand, but that's just an important thing to do at this stage because of the economic impact. And I think if I'm convinced that this certainly COVID did, the extent to which taking our preparedness more seriously is going to have tremendous impacts on the European, U.S. supply chain, energy chain, all of the issues, immigration and mass migration, all of the security issues that we deal with on the global level is abundantly clear. So as again, as I open, probably maybe with bad audio, we're not sure what's going on. No, I don't want to say it's an exciting time, but I think it is an exciting time that we're in a stage where we're accepting that we can measure success by if we fail safer. And I think investments on this end are as important as they are on the sort of, the longer term resiliency and mitigation end.
Great. Samantha, you wanted to add on there?
Yeah, well, Juliet just made a great point just around the terminology, and I think that was actually quite a lot of the discussion and debate at Climate Week too, which was, if we didn't have, ESG, sustainability, climate change labeled as such, would we be more focused on actually moving things forward, because the business imperative, the economic imperative is so clearly there. I mean, who knows? But it is acknowledged as being part of the challenge to some extent in terms of how we actually move along. But like Juliet, I'm optimistic that we're actually getting there.
Yes.
That particularly wasn't my question that I gave you. It came from the Slido here. But just to add a thought, it's unfortunately a negative one. I was in Washington a couple months ago with directors of American banks and some directors of European banks. And one of the questions that the OCC actually asked the directors, audience, is climate a priority for your bank? The Americans said it was not a top priority. All of the Europeans said it was. So that's, again, while I didn't actually ask that question, the difference between what I'm sort of seeing, and I would hope maybe at the local level, that's where you're going to start to see some action. But certainly at the higher end institutions, it does not seem to be their focus at the moment. Robert, question for you.
Yeah.
You can. I think this allows you to expand on your framework and how you think about this. The decision-making apparatus right now seems to be pretty broken or suboptimal, at least over a range of files, not only climate. How do we get to make better decision-making?
Yeah, I mean, it's broken in some places and not others. I think in many of these climate contexts, I mean, I think it starts with trying to have mechanisms where you can really understand how people, what the sources of different oppositions are. I'm not trying to know how to, talk about scaling it yet, but we do a lot of more local and community-based work where you can actually get people, if both in the same rooms, and carry on the conversations with them, separately. And this is, when we link into the analytics, but it's you represent, their points of view, and people, not surprisingly, align their mental models of how the world works and their objectives, and their policy preferences. So it's a nice package. And sometimes people are totally unreasonable, particularly in public, and say things which are just not true. But oftentimes they're making valid points and valid worries. That if you're asking me to do this, you're making a bunch of assumptions which you may have some evidence for, but you don't have a conclusive point. And you basically try to build an environment where everybody's view is represented. You can understand what are the important, the things that they're arguing about that don't make a difference in terms of the key actions you need to take, at least in the near term, and what things actually, do make a difference. And then try to construct, plans that have this idea of low regrets, that are adaptive, that make sense from multiple points of view. So, our sort of classic, success story is on this is Rand and my colleagues were involved in the Louisiana Master Plan for a Sustainable Coast, we put together a gigantic big trade-off model, what-if model. There were representatives of 30 groups across the state. They showed up at all the meetings because $50 billion was at stake, so that incentivizes people to actually come to the meetings. But they spent 2 years with this great big trade-off model, and this is a system where there's lots of scenarios and all the decisions are interlinked. That if I put, I spend money to put a levee in front of your parish and expand the wetlands in front of another parish, and the hurricane comes from this direction, it's great for both of us, but if it comes this direction, it's great for me, but really messes you. So, well, let's spend a little bit more money to fix that problem, but that causes another problem there. And you just spent 2 years with, you can call it like a digital campfire. People are doing the horse trading, understanding its point of views with the world's best modeling available, so you can pull the slider bars and say, what if? After 2 years of that, people came up with a plan they all agreed with, and it passed the legislature unanimously because people had done the work to do it. So, I'm not sure how we scale that to all our problems, but that, I think, is a model for how we can do a better job.
Excellent, good. Samantha, do you see financial institutions, perhaps yourself, requiring mitigation or adaptation activities as a condition of financing properties in high-risk areas or high climate risks?
I mean, I think the more we understand them, I think the greater the likelihood that we move in that direction. And I'm going to answer your question, Mark, but also just tip into what Rob was saying too. I think the more that we can understand what the potential implications are in a given situation, we're never going to be right about what actually plays out, but hopefully we're in a better position to make a good decision once it does actually play out by going through all these exercises and understanding that fan of outcomes. And so I think that really is absolutely going to continue to be an expectation of what we're investing in, that they're doing that work, and that we have assurance that they are putting themselves in the best position to mitigate risks, to adapt to the future that is uncertain.
Okay, good. I think we're closing out on time, so if anybody has any sort of last question you'd like to throw on to Slido, I will try to figure out how to squeeze this into the time. I do have one question for Juliet. I hope you can hear this.
Yeah.
What is the role of government in this insurability dilemma? Doesn't government often and frequently interfere with market signals in big climate events, often for good reason, but to save people from financial disaster? But isn't that a vicious cycle?
Yes. So the question, it's such a great question. So the government has two competing priorities here, right? One is you want to protect consumers from conduct that is unfair to them. The market can be very unfair to consumers on equity issues, on race issues, whatever. So a lot of these laws in California, Florida, New Hampshire, everyone's struggling with this, were created with good intentions on one priority of government. Fast forward 2 decades. Now, I would argue, sounding much more, just given maybe my tendency more towards the consumer perfection, sounding much more, market friendly than I might otherwise, is that government's primary responsibility is to protect people's lives. And by muting the noise, muting the message that the insurance companies are giving us collectively, 1 or 2 insurance companies is chatter. Now it's the tsunami, right? By moving it, government is actually not satisfying its primary obligation because people are making calculations about their safety, which is essentially what insurance should be doing if done right. And so you're seeing those two obligations of government bump up into each other. I think what California is trying to do, it was It had lots of rules that didn't make sense to me from a perspective of they're not making sense when climate change. To some of the changes that we made recently, allowing more risk modeling into how insurance companies can do premiums, allowing greater flexibility so they can change over time. Those also come with consumer protections. I think that's going to be, we're going to play it out over the next couple of years, but that's going to probably be where we end up.
I think that's a great way to actually end, and that was a very positive comment. When we started this, our theme was decision-making in the face of deep uncertainty and the insurability dilemma. I think we've heard less about the uncertainty part. There was actually a bit of certainty in terms of what we were talking about in terms of how people can make some decisions, about how investors are actually making decisions and investing, and how the insurance industry might be able to progress forward. So I've come away from this actually a little bit more positive than we started. And just to add to that positives part, when I talked about the US banks and the European banks in the government session, there were 3 Canadian banks there, and all 3 of the Canadian banks did have climate as a top priority. So we may not be quite aligned with the US on everything, but it was a top priority here. So could we have a round of applause for our position?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.